We are back, and I'm very happy now to be joined by Krystal Ball of Breaking Points, of Crystal Kyle and Friends. If you haven't heard of her already, I'm not exactly sure why. Krystal, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's nice to see you, Emma. Thank you for having me.
I know, it's been too long. I
It
feel
has
like
been.
all time is just completely flattening post-COVID, and it's just like I never see anybody in person anymore. But I guess last time I saw you in person was at the Michael Brooks live show in Philly.
I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
the last time we were together. So,
right.
but I don't really see people that much in real life, even pre-COVID, outside of like my kids and soccer games and Kyle and stuff like that. So it hasn't really changed for me all that much.
I'm gradually becoming a hermit myself. But let's start here because I guess I open with the insane fallout from that Alabama decision regarding IVF, which essentially these Christian theocrats in the Alabama Supreme Court have determined that a fertilized egg is a person. Now, this creates, as I mentioned, a ton of legal obstacles for providers of IVF because they could be held liable for the destruction of any of these embryos and basically be deemed murderers if these little microscopic fertilized eggs are in any way destroyed. That was what was at issue here. And then, of course, just the cascading effects of red states likely copying this. And what was your reaction to seeing this and some of the fallout this week?
I mean, there's a variety of reactions. First of all, it's just horror and things that we thought were no longer on the table are suddenly apparently on the table. You just ask yourself like what year it is and where we're heading with all of this. Because as you said, Alabama has been kind of at the forefront of not just banning abortion, but criminalizing things associated with abortion. The Chief Justice here, in his concurring opinion, put it in biblical terms. So if you want a taste of what Christian nationalism looks like this is what it looks like. For the women in the state of Alabama, it's already having massive implications for families in the state of Alabama, huge implications. I just saw this morning that there's clinics that are already saying because of the legal implications, not only are they not going to conduct IVF in the state, but they're not going to allow embryos to be transferred across state lines. So even already,
Wow.
if you're going to try to seek the procedure out of state as an Alabama woman, you're already effectively out of luck. The Republicans appear to realize how insane this appears to most Americans, at least Republican elites. The Republican Senate committee put out a statement or a memo to all their candidates like, please don't back this. Please don't support this. 86% of Americans support IVF. This is really important. The number of, families that are created through the IVF procedure is huge at this point. So they recognize they could have a potential cascade of Todd Aiken-like
Right.
events devastating their chances for the Senate majority.
Well, it also gives away the game, right? Because they're all always talking about how we need more babies, more babies. They usually mean, white babies.
Of course.
But this is literally about giving women the ability, or people who can get pregnant, the ability to go through with the pregnancy when they may have reproductive challenges or they may not necessarily be in a marriage or a committed relationship and they want to have children regardless. Like, this is about making babies. And yet
Yes.
they want to restrict it because it really is not about caring about life. I mean, they're silent on children getting massacred in Gaza. It's about controlling the family structure in a way that they feel is more aligned with what God wants.
Well, and I'm sure you've seen all this discourse online among these like freak activists like Chris Rufo who want to get rid of recreational sex and crack
Right.
down on birth control. And, you look at these views and they're extraordinarily fringe. Like, of course, you remember all the discourse about how unpopular defund the police was, and defund the police was unpopular when you pulled it. That pales in comparison to like bans on porn and birth control, recreational sex and
Yeah.
IVF. And so on the one hand, you can say, oh, these are just fringe voices. But these are people who are Chris Rufo's extraordinarily influential in conservative circles. The people who are, helping to put together Project 25 and who were in the previous Trump administration, could be in a future Trump administration, They have been waiting their entire lives to strip rights away from women and from families and, anyone that they disagree with their quote unquote lifestyle. So, one of the things that they're floating is enforcing the Comstock Act, which would not require an act of Congress, which would be a de facto national abortion ban. Now, do I think Donald Trump really cares about the abortion issue? No. Did that stop him from granting the wish list of every anti-abortion activist on the right last time around? No, it certainly did not. So, these are things that are back on the table post Dobbs. It really has created this wild, wild west situation where we really don't know where the bottom is.
It's not productive, honestly, to think about politics in terms of what is in the hearts and minds of every leader, as you say. I don't care what Trump believes. Trump probably doesn't give a crap. But it really is just about the constituencies and the groups that are supporting each politician. That's how you have to view power. And Christian nationalists are a huge driver behind Donald Trump and his campaign and the Republican Party generally. And I've said this before on the show, they're a minoritarian party. They don't have the numbers, as you say, but they behave as such. They behave with that respective urgency of cracking down as hard as they can because they know that their window to wield power is limited. And the Democrats literally operate in the exact opposite way.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Republicans have understood for decades now, in particular when it comes to their extreme libertarian for the rich economic views, that these are not popular ideas. So they've had a long-term project. That's why there was so much fixation on getting their justices on the Supreme Court, because they have a long-term project of trying to use the anti-small d democratic levers within the American Republic to try to get their way, and very effectively, by the way, in spite of the fact that the public on almost everything completely disagrees with them. So this is not a new skill or a new tactic for them. Typically, I think in the past, they tried to keep some of their more extreme and insane and unpopular views a little bit more undercover. Now in the social media era, it's all out there for the public to see. And I think it's the one thing that could rescue Joe Biden from a certain defeat is just what a bunch of lunatics he's up against.
That's what they're banking on. And I think that's what their internal polling is telling them, right? That's why there's this confidence despite these clear limitations with the literal candidate being unable to communicate effectively. Clearly, the age is getting to him at this point, despite what I'm hearing on MSNBC. I've been trying to tune in a little this week because it gives me a sense of where normie Democrats are, and then I can orient my coverage around that, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of don't believe your lying eyes and ears, and Biden is fine, and just don't worry about it. He's totally spry. We hear about this in private. And there's a part of me where I go, focusing on this, it's not changing. He's going to be the nominee. He's old. We all get it. But it's also about not ignoring that being an issue for Democrats electorally. It's going to be a massive thing to overcome. And if he wins in the fall, it's basically going to be on the backs of pro-choice abortion activists, of that kind of activating so many voters, particularly suburban women, which I think Trump and Biden are battling over. And it will be in spite of all of these major red flags that would normally, I think, turn off voters in any other circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's insanity what the Democrats are going with here. I don't know. Did you see that Axios report this morning about donors?
Yes.
They're saying that he goes to these, fundraising events, and even there, he'll take 2 or 3 pre-scripted questions that he has note cards so that he can respond to. What the hell are we doing here? And then you've got, people like John Fetterman who'll go on Morning Joe or wherever and tell you that if you dare even say anything about that and acknowledge the reality that 86% of Americans see in front of their eyeballs, that you may as well put your MAGA hat on. And, it makes you feel crazy. I wonder your view. I know there's been a lot of hopes raised recently because of Ezra Klein and Nate Silver coming out and saying he needs to step aside, that maybe somebody will be able to get to him and pressure him to step aside.
It's not happening.
See, I agree with that too. I've lost any hope that that's on the table whatsoever, because I think he is, first of all, he's been chasing the presidency his entire life. Yep. So he has no intention of stepping aside. He's got, a tremendous ego, as all of these men who ascend to the presidency do. It's not like that's unique. And I think that the people around him have genuinely convinced themselves that they basically have like no other option at this point, and it would be chaos, and God forbid that we have any sort of a democratic choice and voters actually get to pick a different Democratic nominee. Like, I think that they really believe that. And so the, Obama or Jill Biden or Bill Clinton or George Soros, whoever we're imagining could step in and push him to the side. Like, there is no organized cabal behind the scenes that really runs it. It really is like this one, fading old man who we are all now, apparently reliant on. I don't even know what to say. And in terms of, I hate to even talk about like how to vote in the fall, because I was one of the ones out there making the case, like, not only is Joe Biden the lesser of two evils prior to October 7th, he has affirmatively done some good things. Like, it's worth an affirmative vote for him, etc. And now I'm like, I can't vote for this man who's backing a genocide, but I'm also clear-eyed about what that means in terms of if Trump gets back in there. So I just think it's all shit options at this point. There is no good or even really better option that's on the table. It's horrifying. It's horrifying, and kind of a seminal moment in the degradation of like our democracy or America kind of sunsetting in this way as I would imagine a world superpower, because on the international stage we have lost all legitimacy, although we did say that during the Iraq War, and I don't know, American empire is still sustaining. But I guess, how do you respond to some of those voting questions? Because in the end, I'm a strategic voter. I believe in like basically your political actions kind of not necessarily being confined to what you do on election day, and you vote in the party that's going to be more willing to hear the side of leftist activists, and they're going to be a little bit better on marginal issues, specifically, I guess, when Biden's running the Democratic Party, right? But at the same time, I don't feel like I can make that case to say, when we have a Palestinian American caller call in and say, like, I'm struggling. What am I supposed to say as a white person, and somebody who has not had the government and my tax dollars go towards committing a genocide against, like, I'm freaking like Finnish. If that would be committing a genocide in Finland, right? Like, and having relatives there or whatever. That would be I could never understand what that's like, right? And so I think there's this fatigue about vote shaming to a degree where I don't want to spend all of our time talking about politics within the confines of election day. It's so limiting. And it also just really, I think, stifles debate and free expression. Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think also, in terms of someone who has a direct connection to the genocide, obviously that's another matter. But, you don't have to be of a particular national origin or race or background to feel absolute horror that your government and your tax dollars are being used to massacre babies and starve them to death and push them permanently out of their homes. So I am very conflicted. I mean, that's just the reality, because like I said previously, I was very clear on, the strategic vote, lesser of two evil. Like, I have problems with Joe Biden, I always have, but he has done some things that I thought were, especially on labor, right? Mm-hmm. He has not been perfect, but he has been way better than anyone in my lifetime on labor. His administration's been very good on antitrust. Like, there were things to affirmatively support there. But then on the other side, there's just a moral red line where you say aiding and abetting, and really it goes beyond aiding and abetting, facilitating a genocide, a crime against humanity, the worst of the atrocities probably that we've seen in our lifetime. Like, facilitating that is just a kind of moral red line that does hit a little different where it becomes, listen, I'm not under any illusion that like not voting for Joe Biden is, I'm not an accelerationist. I don't believe in this, like, oh, if we withhold our votes, and that's going to show them, and they're going to do this and that and the other, and maybe the Trump administration, actually, it'll be better for, like, I'm under no illusions about that, because we already had one Trump administration. But I'm just not sure, for me, from just a basic principle moral perspective, that I can vote for someone who is facilitating, running cover for, shipping the bombs for a genocide. So that's where I am.
I hear you. I mean, we have some time, I think, you know, right? Like, God, I pray that Biden changes course before November. Can't imagine more and more of this. But it's been nearly 5 months at this point. I think you've had some commentary about how you feel like Kamala Harris would be a better option. If I'm remembering that correctly. I agree with you. I mean, she's leaking to Politico and places like that is privately trying to get Biden to relax on the whole genocide of it all. And that's, you know, whenever you read anything in Politico, you have to know that that's there strategically because somebody wants something out there that they can't get out there, right? It's
right, of course.
It's a dressed up gossip rag to a degree, but that there is probably truth to that. I think there's a generational shift in how younger, she's not that young, but she's going to have a different perspective on Palestinians than Biden, who's an avowed Zionist. Obama was better in thumbing his nose at Netanyahu. And I think also the fact that she's a black woman, there's probably an understanding about what it's like to be on the receiving end of American like colonialism, imperialism, violence, what have you, that Biden does not possess. But so I agree with you that she'd be better on this. I just wonder what your assessment is of her generally on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. And the fact that at least she's still like cognitively with it, right. You know. I mean, she's goofy and her delivery is weird. And I think, you know, the coconut tree situation, whatever, it is what it is. I'm not saying she's a good option, right?
Right. But we're like, anything is, when they poll generic Democrat versus Trump, she is generic Democrat. Mm-hmm. So that's who she is. She's a generic Democrat.
At this point, she's not. Generic Democrat at this point is probably more like Dean Phillips. You know,
maybe
someone is kind of undefined to most of the electorate. You know, just kind of standard issue. Votes with Biden most of the time. Has run of the mill views. Kamala is very defined to the electorate, and I do think, you know, she's not a great politician. Usually, her approval rating is even worse than Joe Biden. But there's two things. I mean, number one, you have at least a shot at the, you know, policy towards Palestinians and Israel being a little bit better. You've at least got a shot. We wouldn't know with Joe Biden. He's basically locked into this whatever formulated view he has of Israel from 1973 or whatever. And he's just not going to move off of it. And I think Kyle and I talked to Mark Lamont Hill yesterday for our podcast. And he made a really good point when we were talking about how, okay, Biden obviously doesn't care about the immorality of what he's doing, but perhaps he could be persuaded by the political devastation he's facing because of what he's doing. But he made the point of like, it has never in American politics hurt a candidate to be too pro-Israel. And he's operating off of, you know, 50 years of muscle memory of that being his assumption about American politics. So I just don't think that's going to change. Whereas you're right, with Kamala, there's at least these leaks indicating that she said, hey, maybe you should say something about Islamophobia. Hey, you need to pay attention to what's going on here with Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. And of course, we know that the concerns go way beyond that now, just by dint, like you said, of her age and her identity. You've at least got somewhat of a shot of it being slightly better. I'm under no illusions that she's going to be anywhere where we are on the issue, but maybe it'd be less than the horror we're seeing right now.
Her stepdaughter, I mean, again, we're looking for basic, like the clues, was doing Gaza fundraisers, right? I mean, I don't know.
Oh, I didn't see that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I saw some New York Post headline about it a few months ago where, of course, it was derisive. But yeah, I mean, I guess let's just then talk about some of the situation on the ground there. We received news today, which is the least shocking thing in the world, that the intelligence that the United States based its pulling of UNRWA funding for was assessed with, quote, low confidence. And now they're leaking to the press that basically it's quite threadbare, as we knew. Channel 4 did a report on this a few weeks ago. But the timing of it, the fact that the Biden administration within hours capitulated to this claim by the Israeli government, which now, basically lies as easily as we breathe, Israel does, on the day that the ICJ said that Israel's plausibly committing a genocide. And the Biden administration didn't go, this might be another effort to distract from the act of genocide, and we're just gonna completely go with this, despite the intelligence assessment being made with, quote, low confidence. I mean, what was your response to the pulling of UNRWA funding based on that?
Well, and yeah, the timing of it, as you point out, is really critical. I mean, on the very day that the ICJ says Israel is plausibly committing a genocide, they say, you know what, we're going to retaliate against a lot of the analysis that was contained in that ruling and in the South Africa case came directly from the UN. So this is retaliation. I don't think that the U.S. is so stupid as to just take their word, lock, stock, and barrel, and believe every word they say. I think that they also have their interests served by distracting from that ruling from the ICJ. It's also very inconvenient for the U.S. while we are aiding and abetting and facilitating that genocide and providing diplomatic cover for it. So they shared an interest in distracting from it. So I don't think they were surprised. Emma, I don't know if you saw, but I was able to see what was actually sent to at least the New York Times and these other news outlets that immediately picked up these claims and ran with them as if they were verbatim. I'm talking there was literally no evidence.
None.
It was just, here's the name, here's what we say they did. There was no, here's a video, here's some forensic, nothing. So for the US government or news outlets or anyone, especially given how many times Israel has been caught in just blatant fabrications and lies over and over again, not just with regard to October 7th, but for years, for anyone to run with that was beyond foolish. It was intentionally foolish. That's the only thing that you can really, the only conclusion you can really come to. So, and then beyond that, okay, let's say that it was even true. Let's say that 12 or 8 or 7 or whatever UNRWA employees were somehow associated with October 7th. UNRWA, based on no evidence, fired them. With no due process, by the way. They're already out. So what is it you even want here? What do you want them to do? They've already fired these people. So, which was probably wildly unfair to these individuals who apparently, no evidence has really been proffered against. It's just, especially at a time when children are suffering severe wasting, are literally dying of starvation, when the entire population is suffering with famine and starvation, and you're going to cut off the aid to the number one aid organization on the ground in the Gaza Strip. I mean, sociopathy doesn't begin to describe how disgusting and shameful that is.
Yeah, let's play this clip with this new DoD spokesperson, Bradley. I don't know what number it is. Krystal, I'd love your take on this here. So this is one of the new people they're trotting out, the Department of Defense. Sabrina Singh is her name. Asked by a reporter here about if the IDF had provided the Biden administration with literally any plan to protect civilians ahead of its pending ground invasion of Rafah, where over 1 million Palestinians have fled and have nowhere left to go. They're bombing Rafah still, regardless. People dying in their tents, children's heads exploding. But a ground invasion would be just another escalation in this slaughter. Here is the response where basically they admit that there was no plan provided.
Has the IDF provided any plans to DoD about for its plan to protect civilians ahead of any kind of ground invasion?
I'm not aware of any plan fully presented to the United States to review. Again, we're not asking to check their homework. What we're asking them to do is put forward a credible plan that they will be able to, as we have said in many conversations, protect the over 1 million innocent Palestinians that are there. And of course, any credible plan would have to take into account food, medicine, services, how are you going to provide those as you move a population? I know that's something that they're working through. The secretary, of course, remains engaged with Minister Gallant, not just at his level, but levels here at this building and throughout the interagency. But I'm just not going to get ahead of any plans that Israel's working on right now.
He has not seen that plan yet.
No, we haven't seen the plan, but we're not also asking to grade homework here. We want to make sure that whatever plan that they, do brief us on does include protecting innocent civilians in that region.
Homework. We're not trying to check their homework. I mean, they can proofread themselves. This is a sociopathic way to speak about this genocide, and also to completely obscure the complicity of the United States. And so we're providing them with all of these materials, weaponry. I mean, Biden circumventing Congress. And you're saying that there's no review of how those weapons are supposed to be used? That is, by the way, a flagrant violation of the Leahy rule.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's actually a violation of our own laws, not to mention any sort of morality or decency. I mean, listen, even if we weren't running diplomatic cover for them at the UN, running cover for them at the ICJ, expediting weapons shipments, providing billions in aid every single year, even if we weren't doing any of those things, we would still have a moral responsibility to try to do what we could to intervene to prevent genocide. We are signatories to the Genocide Convention, which obligates us to work to prevent genocide, not only, to keep us from aiding and abetting a genocide. So even if we weren't, but the fact that we are directly implicated here, and then she thinks she can just hand wave away. And I saw one of these other ghouls the other day say, oh, well, it's up to Israel. Of course, they can do whatever they want. What? I mean, it's sick.
It's a fiction, Krystal. First of all, it's a fiction that Israel is sovereign. I mean, it is our colonial outpost in the Middle East. Let's be real about the strategic value of it for the United States. It is a proxy state in many ways of the United States that has become incredibly radicalized. And then the other fiction that Palestinians are a sovereign, separate actor in this war, as opposed to people housed in a concentration camp. That's what Gaza is. They're concentrated in that area, not in the same way that the Holocaust concentration camps are, but in the way that other concentration camps have been executed throughout history. Like, they are concentrated in that place and they have nowhere to go. And they're not even a state that is able to bargain in the way that is being described. I mean, we're calling it a war, and it's just getting so frustrating for me because this is a trapped population that Israel completely controls every part of their life, every movement, the borders, land and sea. So this is not a war. This is a extermination of a population shooting fish in a barrel.
That's exactly right. It's a slaughter. It is not a war. It's a slaughter. And, with all this, even this conversation of, oh, well, what's your plan for Rafah? How are you going to protect the civilians in Rafah? Even that whole conversation is so bullshit. There's nowhere for these people. It's 1.3 million people. They've already been pushed out of Gaza City, pushed out of Khan Yunis. Many of these people have had to move some 6 different times, desperately searching in vain for safety. There is no plan that is going to protect those people outside of an immediate ceasefire, an immediate surge of aid. And even then, even if it stopped right now, and this is what it will never be over. Even if it stopped right now, the people who have managed to survive, they are going to have psychological and literal physical scars forever. These reports of kids as young as 5 going to doctors and saying they'd rather be dead. Yep. The little boy who laid down in the road to sleep because he hoped he would be run over after his family was killed. The damage has already been so horrific. But no, there's not going to be a plan to save the civilians in Rafah. The whole point is annihilation. The whole point is devastation. The whole point is destruction. I appreciate some of these psychotic right-wing voices like this lady who's the minister of inclusion and
we played that
feminism
yesterday.
Or whatever the hell her title is.
Right.
And she says, I'm proud of the ruins of Gaza. I want the babies, their children, their grandchildren, to tell them what the Jews did, which, by the way to like implicate every Jew in the world in your monstrosity.
Exactly.
Talk about anti-Semitism. But I appreciate the honesty that comes from the right, because they're upfront about, hey, we want to push these people out. We want them all gone. We want to resettle the Gaza Strip. Well, that is the policy of their government, and that's the policy our government is backing. So get rid of all these fictions and all these fantasies and all these fake debates that we're having about the quote unquote day after, or the civilian plan for Rafah. This is all nonsense, distraction, and bullshit. It's a distraction from the reality of what the real plan is, which is unfolding right now in front of all of our eyes.
Yeah, and Netanyahu is basically saying, and now has said multiple times publicly, that there's no option for a Palestinian state. Which, like, by the way, I agree with, because a one-state solution without barriers is actually the more realistic option because of how much territory Israel has seized. There's no real way for a Palestinian state to actually, without a ton of land back, to exist in a two-state reality. But what Netanyahu is saying publicly is, and many times over, flagrantly basically flipping off Biden, is that indefinite occupation after this, no Palestinian state, we will control the West Bank and we will control Gaza and we will resettle it, is really what is going to happen. And that also just makes Biden look so weak that I don't understand why he doesn't understand how, the average person who isn't paying full attention to this, right? They just think he looks weak if they hear any of this. Like, why? We're the ones giving them billions of dollars. Why is Netanyahu telling him what to do?
You're not impressed by the leaks about, the tough conversations. They're having very tough conversations behind the scenes, very difficult conversations. He hung up on Netanyahu back in December. He called him an asshole. Yeah, he says he's a bad guy. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people too, we did this focus group with RFK Jr. supporters, and listen, RFK Jr. is horrendous on Israel. So.
Yes, we played your questioning of him, which was great actually, because he's even more Zionist than Biden.
Oh my God, yeah, if that's even possible. But yeah. In any case, we asked his supporters, what they thought about Israel. They were kind of unfamiliar with his views. But it was actually the two Black women in the group who had this very instinctive, which is, I think, a very normie reaction of like, we're funding this thing that's going on, which is really horrifying. And we see these things that are coming out and we got a lot of problems at home. Like, why aren't you focused on helping to make our lives better? And right. I do think that is, even outside of the morality of it and, the arguments that we think a lot about and what's happening on the ground and our responsibility there. But there's also just this sort of independent normie instinct of, why are we so invested? Why is the Congress spending all their time trying to send money to Israel when we've got all these issues here at home? Not to mention, a poll just came out. Every single religious group in the country supports a ceasefire, including a majority of Jewish Americans support a ceasefire at this point. And then when you look at the Democratic base, the majority of the Democratic base says, yeah, it's a genocide. It's a genocide. Yep. Another 30% say it might be a genocide. We're not sure. Yep. So the American people, I mean, they are wildly at odds with what is being done in their name. And, it just seems like we talk a lot about the preservation of democracy and saving democracy. It's like, where's the democracy on this? The message is loud and clear that people are horrified by these actions, and yet it doesn't seem to move the needle one bit.
Yep, exactly. And speaking of democracy, I just wanted to touch on this really briefly before we let you go, Krystal. I know you've been covering Julian Assange and the efforts, the last kind of ditch effort by his lawyers to appeal his extradition from the United Kingdom to the United States to face espionage charges, where he would be basically put in a maximum security prison here in the US for the rest of his life. This is a really scary precedent for press freedom. And it's also crazy. Like, he's not even an American citizen. And right. The idea that the UK would be complicit in doing that is only the US in its like kind of superpower posture could make these kinds of demands. What's your reaction to the developments in that case?
Yeah, so I'm not going to pretend here to be an expert on the UK legal system, which I find very perplexing and Byzantine. But, effectively what the hearings this week were about was arguing whether he's even allowed an appeal, a final appeal about blocking his extradition. And we should also keep in mind, I mean, Julian's a human being. He's got a family. He's got a wife. He's got kids. And they're killing him. I mean, he is so weak and in such poor health that he was not even able to attend these hearings remotely. And this is what his family has been saying for a long time now, that his health is in incredible decline because of his many years of imprisonment and persecution. To your point, the Australian government is dramatically at odds. I mean, the parliament, the prime minister, they have all said, we want Julian sent home. We want this to end. So we're going directly against the Australian government. But of course, the most critical piece here is the dramatic implications for press freedom. And, whatever you think about Julian Assange as a person, or, what he did with Hillary Clinton, or, what he's being charged here, by the way, has to do with the Bush era war crimes. But the Obama-Biden administration originally made the determination, we cannot charge him. Like, we hate him as much as anybody else, they felt like, but we can't charge him without also implicating other publishers, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post. And so they didn't. It was the Trump DOJ that charged him. And now the Biden administration is continuing it. And, it just exposes all their talk and concern about political prisoners like Navalny, about press freedom, certainly, as just hollow and hypocritical. So it is a critical moment for him. I have no idea whether there's any chance that he has to actually block this extradition. I'm not particularly hopeful, but that's where things stand right now.
Yeah, what he revealed, and that was the Chelsea Manning leaks that you're referring to, were war crimes committed by U.S. troops, where in the Apache helicopter video, there was like this, you hear them in the background saying like, can we shoot, getting excited to shoot these civilians, which, the Bush administration, I think, claimed were terrorists. Obviously they weren't, and then killed two Reuters journalists, people, media workers. The United States did that, and that was a big part of what Assange uncovered. And as you say, the Guardian, the New York Times, other publications, he works with them on that, and they have written a letter saying we oppose this because of the implications for press freedom.
Yeah, and it's also worth remembering that the people who actually committed those war crimes, they never faced accountability.
Right.
And yet here's Julian Assange all these years later, still imprisoned, still facing prosecution, and very much in danger of dying in jail.
Krystal Ball, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everyone should check out Breaking Points, Krystal Kyle and Friends. Where else can people find your work, Krystal?
That'll work. Those are good places.
All right. Well, yeah, just Google it, and we'll also put a link to your show and stuff in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Emma. Take care.
Take care.